8:15 right now, and now we're an hour into the Supreme Court hearings, but they didn't first take up the Defense of Marriage Act, so we haven't heard yet what's going on inside the courtroom, but we do know what issue they're considering this time about same-sex marriage, and that is, as our last expert was saying, it comes down to death and taxes, and if you should have the same benefits if you're a man and a woman married, or woman and woman, or man and man.
And it comes down to a woman having to pay an inheritance tax on her spouse. They were legally married, but not recognized by federal law because of the Defense of Marriage Act.
It's a case that can connect with everybody in America, right? Whether or not you have to pay taxes. I think the interesting issue is going to be today, and there are two issues, by the way, in DOMA, just to make clear. One is, does the federal government have to recognize your marriage? And the other is, do states have to recognize each other's marriages? That's not before the court today. So what's before the court today is that Congress defined marriage as between a man and a woman. In the past, Congress never defined marriage. In the past, Congress always said, that's for states to do. This time, Congress said, no, we're going to define it. And the question is there any good reason to exclude same-sex couples from that definition, other than that you don't like gay people? And if there's nothing more than that, then there's not even a rational basis to support the law. If that's the case, it falls.
What I find most interesting is you have 2 days in a row, you've got cases where the government refuses to defend themselves. California refused to defend Prop 8, and the Obama administration's not defending DOMA.
It's so unusual in this case, Mark, that they actually appointed an outside lawyer to argue this issue to them, which is, okay, Obama, by the way, the Obama administration technically did appeal it because they wanted it in front of the court, but then they refused to file a brief. So the court had to hire its own lawyer to come in and argue this position to them. I'm not sure that's why it's going to die today. It's again going to come down to, is there a legitimate reason other than not liking people to say that this couple who was married legally in the state, where the state says you are legally married, or in a country like Canada where you're legally married, we're not going to give you the same benefits as your neighbors?
Just kind of overshadowing, I think, both cases here is that the court has a backdoor way out by saying, well, you don't have legal standing because you weren't the one who was named in the suit to defend it.
That may be the most shocking thing. I think yesterday there's a very high chance the court literally won't issue an opinion. We'll just say, oops, we shouldn't have taken it, it was improvidently granted, or we don't have standing. It could happen again today. I think there's a better chance today they're going to get to the heart of the issue, which is, in defining it just to be heterosexual couples, is that just because you don't like gay people? Is there a real good reason to do it that would withstand constitutional scrutiny?
We're looking at state and federal stuff too, and there's a lot of instances like with pot, for example. We say, oh yeah, it's legal, but federally we're going to prosecute you. So they do have different bars. They use them all the time, and the feds always went out over the state.
They do, typically speaking. This is a different kind of question, though, in that marriage traditionally was a state issue. Controlled substances, marijuana, cocaine, all the rest have traditionally been federal issues. Trade, international relations. But for almost 200 years of this country, Congress never touched defining marriage. They said, you know what, states get to do that. California gets to do it, Texas gets to do it, New York.
And how well did that work out when black and white couple was traveling from one legal state to one illegal state?
Great point. It worked for a long time, and the court let states do it. It finally hit a breaking point where the court stepped out and said, no, this is a federal issue that people have a right to be treated equally. And that's the debate today. Does the Equal Protection Clause say if you're black or white, straight or gay, you're the same in the Constitution's eyes?
Yeah, but they said when it came to black and white, you know, we have to give this time. And so they said on the gay issue too, we got to give this some time. This is so new. It's just 5 years old.
And that's the fundamental debate about what's the court's job. And I think that's what people are going to have to wrestle with today, is the court supposed to step out and say, you shouldn't have to wait to get equal rights? Is it the court's job to step in and actually be the trailblazer? If you look at the history of the court, I got to say it's going to be a little bit disappointing for the advocates of gay marriage, because the court traditionally goes very slow. It traditionally does not get ahead of it. It was many, many years that white folks could marry black folks in this country.
Well, I was
surprised. The court said that's up to the states.
But I didn't make that up. They said this is only 5 years old, and that's what shocked me. I'm like, really? It's 5 years old, this whole issue?
It's
5 years old.
Say that. It's
basically wait your time is the argument. It's not a very comforting argument to those who are being denied rights.
It's just saying the justice not knowing the facts, with Kennedy saying it's only a 5-year issue. We had Scalia calling Kamala Harris
That was one of the funnier moments. I think one of the most exchanges yesterday was when Justice Kagan was questioning the government's lawyer and saying, okay, let me give you a different example. Two 55-year-old folks marry a man and a woman, and he kept, the advocate kept arguing, well, maybe they could have babies. She said, no, the woman is 55 years old. It's like he didn't get the biology of it all. So,
and they brought up Strom Thurmond, who had a baby at age 70.
So I think there is a bit of a culture gap at times. I think you see the vestiges of what was always an all-male institution, an older institution. That court is a very small slice of American life.
Right.
And I think what you saw yesterday in the argument is people trying to pry into it, saying, wait, the world is changing really, really fast. Do you want to be behind it or ahead of it?
And I found it interesting, too, they almost were saying, like, if you opened the can of worms, like in California, then you have to live with the full can. But if you didn't open the can of worms at all, that's fine, too. And that was a weird argument, too.
I think that's a totally losing argument. But on the opening cans, the question is, what's the real damage? So take the side for a minute of the person defending DOMA. Is it really the case, are they going to argue today, that if you allow gays to get tax benefits,
yes,
that straight marriage will fall apart? That America will harm it. What is the harm? And that was asked again yesterday. If there's no cause effect, if giving this right equally to all Americans isn't going to hurt anything else, then how does it destroy marriage?
And they say, well, it hurts the institution of marriage.
How, though? How, though?
So they're going to have to answer the how.
Here's something I never heard. A friend of mine say, I'm getting divorced, and you say, well, why are you getting divorced? And, well, those two guys down the street got married. I've never heard a straight couple in my life say the reason they're getting divorced is because some gay folks, some old ladies down the road got married and got tax benefits. So the government's got to argue there's a good reason to discriminate other than we don't like these kind of people.
If the government doesn't want to rule in Prop 8, it goes back to the unconstitutional ruling in California. Now, with today's DOMA case, there have been several courts that have already ruled it unconstitutional.
Correct.
If they decide that they don't have standing in this one and they don't want to rule on that one, does it go back to the lower court ruling?
If they simply today, again, issue no opinion and sort of duck the whole thing under jurisdictional issues, then those districts in which the Court of Appeals, in this case the New York area, it would stand in that area, and then it could be fought out circuit by circuit throughout the country.
And that's the thing, it only applies to those New England states. It doesn't apply to Washington, which just passed gay marriage. It doesn't apply to District of Columbia, so it's a very tight issue.
The one thing I can say with confidence, and we should all know leaving today, is this fight is not over, especially after we saw yesterday. There will be years of this fight coming out. It's just beginning. Remember, the first gay rights case was less than 30 years ago. 30 years ago, the court ruled same-sex couples had no right behind locked, closed doors to have sex. That wasn't even covered by the Constitution. So this is evolving very rapidly. It will be coming back and back, and I think it's going to be fought at the ballot boxes. The good news for advocates of same-sex marriage is increasingly that issue is starting to win. Young people overwhelmingly think people should have equal rights. So the question is the court going to step in, or is it going to be a political fight? Typically, the court allows it to be a political fight. And again, look at the anti-miscegenation laws. It took many years for the courts to say, no, a black person has a fundamental constitutional right to be treated equally and marry who the heck they want. Will they do the same thing for same-sex couples?
All right, thank you, Jim. Thanks for being here.
All right, so now we're about an hour and 5 minutes into the hearings happening in the Supreme Court, and they're not going to release the transcripts, it looks like, for several hours later this morning.
We are getting some blogs coming out of the court, though, and Michael Yaki, our political analyst, analyzing that. He's going to be back with us coming up in about 10 minutes. We're going to talk more about this issue.
Yep, and then we'll have the whole thing on KRON4.com, on our website, and on our 24/7 news channel. That's Comcast 193.
All right.